Peace and love, family. Peace and love. Okay, so what I decided to do is I'm going to start dealing with probably daily, almost daily, dealing with news stories that catch my attention. We're still heavy into this political change that's underway, so I'm gonna stick with that. We talked about, well, I commented on the Hunter Biden, what you call it, pardon. But again, that was to be expected. But now, very interesting, the Biden senior staff is discussing preemptive pardons. Preemptive pardons. I never heard this was even possible. Doing a little wee bit of research, I see that there are some precedents where this has been done before. And we'll get into that in a second. So at any rate, this is from Politico. I'm only going to read the first couple stanzas. Biden White House is discussing preemptive pardons for those in Trump's crosshairs, so they say. All right, President Joe Biden's senior aides are conducting a vigorous internal debate over whether to issue preemptive pardons to a range of current and former public officials who could be targeted with President-elect Donald Trump's return to the White House. This, according to senior Democrats familiar with the discussions. Biden's aides are deeply concerned about a range of current and former officials who could find themselves facing inquiries and even indictments. A sense of alarm which has only accelerated since Trump last weekend announced the appointment of Kash Patel to lead the FBI. Patel has publicly vowed to pursue Trump's critics. Now, Mr. Patel is a high-ranking dude, man. He was a heavyweight dude dealing with counterintelligence stuff. Now, I don't have his bio by memory, but I have watched a number of his exposés. Very, very well learned man, and he was not afraid to speak his mind about some of the corrupt things that have been going on prior to Trump coming back into office. So he's a key figure. By the way, in future days, in the days to come, I will be taking some deep dives into these appointees. I started just a little bit of research, but it's a lot to do. I'm going to wait for it to be finalized, but I'm going to dig into that so we can see who these people are. At any rate, moving forward, the White House officials, however, are carefully weighing the extraordinary step of handing out blanket pardons for those who have committed crimes. For those who've committed no crimes. Those who've committed no crimes. Both because it could suggest impropriety, only fueling Trump's critics, and because those offered preemptive pardons may reject them. The deliberations touch on pardoning those currently in office, elected and appointed, as well as former officials who've angered Trump and his loyalists. They kill me with this slant, but let me finish this last paragraph. Those who could face exposure include such members of Congress's January 6th committee, such as Senator-elect Adam Schiff, Democrat from California, and former GOP Representative Liz Cheney of Wyoming. Trump has previously said Cheney should go to jail along with the rest of the unselect committee. Also mentioned by Biden's aides are a pardon for Anthony Fauci. We know who he is, the former head of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, who became a lightning rod for criticism from the right during the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm going to pause right there. So let's deal with this unselect committee, which in fact it really was. It was a kangaroo sham court, which nobody talks about, conveniently they destroyed all of the so-called evidence that they collected during this sham kangaroo court scenario. Conveniently, they destroyed it all before they handed it over to the members of Congress that had the right to see the information. Destroyed it. Did not turn it over. Did not hand it over for an outside perspective. This is the same thing that Hillary Clinton did when she destroyed all that information from her private laptop exchanges, right? This is a common theme with the recent Democrats. Now, I'm sure you can find some precedent where Republicans had done it before. I'm sure you can, but we're not talking about Republicans right now. We're talking about, and this was a bipartisan committee because, again, Trump has enemies on both sides of the aisle. But the bottom line, look into it. The January 6th committee destroyed the evidence without handing it over. Mind you, there are hours and hours of independent documentary style reporting on what happened on January 6th. One thing that I will not let you forget is conveniently, which, and again, I need to look this up for all you naysayers. I need to look up the actual article and such that presents this. But the bottom line is the president has the authority to grant the Speaker of the House the ability to utilize the National Guard. President Trump authorized the use of the National Guard. It was up to Nancy Pelosi in her position as Speaker of the House to put them on the grounds. And she elected not to, along with the mayor of D.C. Never forget that. Now, moving on to Anthony Fauci. Here it is, the spin. Let's say Fauci, the former head, who became a lightning rod for criticism from the right during the COVID-19 pandemic. At this point, if you still are under the illusion that Anthony Fauci was not a part of the gain of research funding, authorized gain of function research and funding to the Wuhan lab in China, you've been under a rock. Gain of function, according to I believe it was Congress, was no longer supposed to be funded, which is where you go in and you manipulate a known pathogen, virus, etc., and you do just what it says. You increase its gain of function. You increase the functionality of it, thus weaponizing the germ or virus. That's exactly what they did. Anthony Fauci was a part of supporting that research with funding. After that, we all have seen, or you should have seen, if you look at anything other than mainstream news, legacy news, or the left-leaning news, you would know by now that many of those mandates, number one, were not proper. They did not serve the purpose that they set in front of us. He told us flat out, he didn't even know where the 6-foot rule came from. But here's the thing, and this is what I was telling people in the moment. Mind you, we all know people that took that shot, right? Under duress, many of you. Many of you took it because you thought you were doing your civic duty. Many of you took it because you believed what they were, the propaganda they were shoving down your throat. Many of you took it because you were going to lose your fucking job if you didn't. That's what you call being under duress. So it's not about blaming, pointing fingers, none of that. The bottom line, though, is this. For those of us that refused to take that shot, for me, it was a matter of common sense. Number one, anytime you tell black people to get in the front of the fucking line, it's a catch. We coming to you first, it's free, black people first. I don't want no parts of it. Beyond that, they had to be lying to us on one side of the coin or the other. Because either you have not taken these shots through the rigors of triple-blind trials that any other shot, so-called vaccine, inoculation, or drug coming to the market is supposed to go through, which takes years of time and research. This is why it's never been a precedent where in the middle of a pandemic, some sort of vaccine is brought to the table, because you can't test it long enough to confirm whether or not what you're producing or presenting is actually the efficacy of it, the safety of it. So they was lying to us off the top, because you couldn't have tested this long enough to be telling me for sure that your shit is safe. That's the first thing. Or other side of the lie on your coin of your lies, is that you've been working on it for years. So if you've been working on it for years, then it ain't no up out the blue, here goes a pandemic we don't have no idea what's coming. On top of the fact they ran absolute exercises, and I don't have it off the top of my head, but they ran simulations, Bill Gates and the rest of them, simulations and other global leaders, simulations on this, plandemic, plandemic virus that's going to run the world rampant. And that's what they did. So to pardon Anthony Fauci, you better pardon his ass, because he should be locked up for forever. Period. No two ways about it. So now, shifting gears to how it's going to play out now. One thing that folks, I come to sit back and ponder and think about, Donald Trump was a rookie in politics last time, right? He was not a political figure ever before, other than donating to both sides of the aisle, right? So once he got into the office, and I probably should save this for another video. Let me cut this short before this get too long. Y'all don't pay attention anyway. So the news of the day is preemptive. Oh, I do want to tell you about this. Preemptive pardons. So I put it in the machine. Question was, I don't see the question now, but give me examples of preemptive pardons. You never can go to the first page of Google, so I had to dig deep 4, 5, 6, 7 pages down. So here we go. This is from the Washington Examiner. Preemptive pardon. How Biden's possible plans have historical precedents. Okay, let's see. President Joe Biden is reportedly considering issuing preemptive pardons for some current and former elected officials whom President-elect Donald Trump deems his enemies. History has shown that there is some precedent for these types of pardons. Cool. The most famous case is likely when President Gerald Ford pardoned his predecessor, Tricky Dick Richard Nixon, after the latter resigned in the wake of the Watergate scandal in 1974. This predates my being born. Ford pardoned Nixon, quote, for all offenses against the United States which he has committed or may have committed or taken part in during the period from January 20th, 1969 through August 9th, 1974. End quote. So the most famous is Gerald Ford pardoning Richard Nixon. Now, I'm not really familiar with Watergate. We've all heard about it, but I have not done any digging to understand just how bad he put his wiener in us. We'll find out at another date. Moving forward, other presidents have utilized preemptive pardons too. Who is that? President George Washington issued the first presidential pardon in 1795 to rebels involved in the Whiskey Rebellion in Western Pennsylvania, all of whom had been accused of treason. Used it for treason. Joe Biden has committed treason. Won't go down that rabbit hole here. Another example, President Andrew Johnson granted, quote, a full pardon and amnesty to all former Confederates on Christmas Day in 1868. The pardon extended to all those, quote, who directly or indirectly participated in the late insurrection or rebellion, end quote. It was intended to unite the fractured country under the federal government after the Civil War. We're talking about preemptive pardons for Richard Nixon, issued by George Washington, and now President Andrew Johnson post the Civil War. And then in 1977, President Jimmy Carter pardoned all men who dodged the draft during the Vietnam War. That's a big deal. People who did not believe in that war, that was a pardon. That sounds pretty good. That one makes sense. And then George H.W. Bush pardoned former Defense Secretary Caspar Weinberger, who was indicted on charges of lying to Congress about selling arms to Iran in 1992. Now, I believe that's the Iran-Contra scandal. I have to look into that. But here it is, a Republican issuing a pardon for somebody involved in that, which I'm pretty sure that was scandalous. That was clandestine. We have to look into that for further. Now we go further, just a couple more paragraphs, and I'll leave y'all alone. President Trump himself also issued preemptive pardons. He pardoned former White House chief strategist Steve Bannon in the last hours of his first term. Bannon was awaiting trial on federal charges relating to defrauding donors in a fundraising campaign focused on fulfilling Trump's promise to build a wall on the southern border. Excuse me, I know nothing about that, but we know we needed that wall. And hey, who knows? Bannon could have done something shady. I don't know. I'm not saying he did, he didn't, because I have no idea. And then beyond that, those who are allegedly being considered to be pardoned by Biden are Senator-elect, we just talked about this, Adam Schiff and Liz Cheney, both of whom were of the House January 6 committee and the former head of the National Institute. We talked about Anthony Fauci. All right, last piece. According to NPR, investigation into Trump's rally speeches, interviews, and social media posts, the president-elect has issued more than 100 threats to investigate, prosecute, imprison, or otherwise punish his perceived opponent since 2022. So they'll keep putting that slant that he's seeking revenge, but guess what? Why wouldn't you seek it? Not to say that he is, but it just always blows my mind. It was all fun and games. It was all good when you brought up these fake ass trials, these fake ass cases, where you funded cases with government money, where you tampered with evidence, when you brought up a case in New York where there was no victim, where you brought that case up about the bank and the bank came in and on behalf of Donald Trump to say the business went good, everything was beautiful. No fucking victim, but you bring up this case, make this case up with this enormous amount of money. The lady who, it's always a sexual assault. Every single person, every person they don't like, then somewhere sexually assaulted somebody. Like, she get $85 million. Don't let me get started. Bottom line, today's talk was on preemptive pardons for Mr. Joe Biden. And hey, that's my take on the news. I'll be doing this regularly. Please, as they say, like, share, subscribe, and comment. Come on, give me some feedback. Give me something, to combat these statements that I'm making. Peace and love. Stay tuned. More controversy coming your way. Holla. And one more thing about this preemptive pardon piece that I failed to mention previously. Is it not strange to anybody else that it's senior staff having this conversation absent of the so-called president? Like, who's running the fucking country? No, really. How does a senior staff decide to have contemplation about preemptive pardons absent of the so-called president being involved? Here's what I mean. The West Wing deliberations have been organized by White House counsel Ed Siskel, but include a range of other aides, including Chief of Staff Jeff Zients, the president himself, who was intensely focused on his son's pardon, has not been brought into the broader pardon discussions yet, according to people familiar with the deliberations. The conversations were spurred by Trump's repeated threats and quiet lobbying by congressional Democrats, though not by those seeking pardons themselves. The beneficiaries know nothing. A well-connected Democrat told me about those who could receive pardons. Biden's ultimate decision, though, could prove just as consequential to some of the country's most high-profile public officials as his choice to pardon his son. The White House spokesperson declined to comment on, but did not deny the discussions. It's interesting that the conservatives are taking place, the conversations are taking place at all reflects the growing anxieties amongst high-level Democrats about just how far Trump's reprisals could go once he reclaims power. The remarkable 11-year breadth of Biden's pardon of his son Hunter illustrated how worried the White House is about Trump's officials seizing any potential openings for prosecution. And I won't keep reading because y'all don't want to hear me keep reading. This has got some length to it. But again, seniors within the administration having discussions absent of the president about such a thing as controversial and consequential as this. It just continues to bespeak of the lack of leadership, the ineptitude of the so-called president. And by the way, where is Mrs. Imhoff? I'm just saying, where is Mrs. Imhoff? Reading Christmas stories with Mr. Waltz. Stay tuned.